Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Let me introduce myself. I am Satish Chandra, a career strategist for leaders based out of Bangalore in India. And, today's topic of conversation on this webinar will be on how do we leverage assessments for our own career management. And in today's times, when a lot of people are reflecting on what direction their career should go on, we thought, this is the right time to look at assessments and how one can leverage assessments in their own career management going forward. And to take us through this journey of understanding assessments, we have with us Dr. Joseph George, OD and leadership facilitator, an executive coach, and a human assessments specialist since the last 2 decades. He comes with a rich experience in working with global organizations, both inside the organization and as a consultant across the globe. And very early in his career, he was a part of the psychometric advocacy group in one of the large corporates in Wipro. And who better than Dr. Joseph to take us through this whole assessments, unraveling it for us and see how we can utilize it for our advantage. So welcome, Dr. Joseph George. And
Thank you.
Nice to have you on our show.
Thank you, Satish. I'm glad to be invited by you. This is an opportunity for us to share from our experiences, and I look forward to your, process as we go through this one.
Yeah. It's really nice of you, Dr. Joseph. I know you're stuck up in Phoenix, Arizona, while on travel, and really thanks for taking out this time and sharing your valuable insights onto this thing on. So the way we will structure this program for the next 45 minutes, initially I just want you to share with us the brief history about assessments, and then we will dive into how people can use assessments to overcome some of the typical career management perspectives, and finally end the conversation with having known assessments, having known what are problems assessments can be used to solve when it comes to managing careers, what to do next. And probably we will take about 40-45 minutes for this conversation, and that is how we would go on. And so before going on to assessments, Joseph, I want to hear from you. What are your perspectives on career management itself? Post-COVID, what are some things which will change? What are some things that will remain the same as you are gathering your insights from talking to many people in that part of the world, as well as many leaders in India?
Yeah, so much that can be said. I think starting from the present moment, it's useful to acknowledge that this virus has really had a systemic effect world over. And that has meant that many careers in the conventional sense are poised for uncertainty. And in that sense, career as a concept may be going through a metamorphosis. We do not know the end result of this, but I think the underlying bottom line is, will people be gainfully employed to take care of their basic needs? And what are the forms of employment that will allow for it? Basically, if you were to look at people in careers up until now, they are confronted with at least 2 human dimensions or behavioral preferences that they would re-examine to adapt to this particular situation. Number one, they will tend to take lesser risk. Number two, it's good to be a lowering of optimism in the short run, in that there are forces beyond one's control, and therefore being cheerful doesn't look realistic. So that maybe sums up the mood that I sense right now.
Interesting perspectives, sir. Two key points that you're figuring out is, yes, people could become less risk averse, number one. And yes,
there would be risk averse. There would be risk averse.
Yeah. And they would be risk averse. And yes, optimism is taken a hit. And yes, people would want to sit back, reflect on every of their career move in a much more informed manner. And what I'm hearing from my own conversation with many leaders across is that, going forward, every professional needs to take more responsibility for his own career management than it was in the pre-COVID days. And that is what, it's good to know that, we are syncing up on some of the different perspectives on career management. With that brief, perspective, let us shift our conversation to assessments. This behavioral assessments, the field is so huge, so vast. We can look at things from multiple dimensions. And in this conversation, we will look at it from one angle, that is about how to use behavioral assessments for a career management of a specific professional by himself, rather than assessment being used by his organization to chart out his career path going ahead. In that context, Joseph, I would invite you to share some, light on the various aspects of assessments, the origins, how it has evolved now, and a brief intro about that journey could help our listeners grapple with this, this tool of behavioral assessments.
Sure, I'll make an attempt to demystify some aspects that sometimes get erroneously socialized, and of course enable people who are going through stressful times to make more mindful decisions regarding their own assessments. To begin with, as to your request on the history and origins, assessments on human beings got a more methodical, you may say, neo-scientific sense, where in 1905, there was a French psychologist who was studying scholastic achievements and aptitudes. His name was Alfred Binet, and he started looking at these kind of things by age grades. Soon, news of this spread across, and psychologists from Stanford got inspired to look into this work, and they combined energies to produce something known as the Stanford Binet intelligence scale. The name of the assessment clearly indicates intelligence. So you can say that the initial history was to do with IQ, but when psychologists got interested over a period of time, some of this got transformed. So bear with me a little bit just to put things in perspective, and I think I'll run through this history in quick notice. So around late 1920s too, there were several people from the social sciences who were taking principles from the physical sciences. You see, the Industrial Revolution was based on the physical sciences, physics, chemistry, math, and these things. So aspects of measurement from that field started finding some kind of adaptation in measurement of human tendencies. So over a period of time, you've seen people developing assessments around human behaviors. They were classified by people like Cattell and so on and so forth. And I'll just put in a popular perspective. Many people know of a movie called Wonder Woman. Well, the sociological origins of Wonder Woman is more interesting for common people to note. It was the second life of a psychologist that produced this caricature called Wonder Woman. His name was William Moulton Marston. And he, along with his wife, in their first avatar, were actually looking at the intersection between stress and anxiety-based response, especially to do with blood pressure and stuff. This enabled Marston to actually create a lie detector scale, first of its kind. But his larger body of work got into personal dimensions that is now known as the DISC, or the DISC theory of assessments.
Oh, interesting.
Now, yes, so this got into the same category of trait-based measurements that were there. At the same time, there were more intuitive people, disciples of Freud, you could say, Jung, but breakaway disciples who got into archetypes inspired by works done by philosophers, including Whitehead and John Dewey, who was studying the brain. And they looked at the lobes of the brain and the dialectical tensions happening between different lobes. So then you have what is now known as the Mbti, which is not the assessment that you would expect of in the conventional sense, but it sorts people. It's a people sorter into 16 different types. In conventional language, if people have studied even high school chemistry, it's like a litmus test. So you put that paper into this MBTI liquid, and it will tell you which of the 16 types you are. But it doesn't quite capture sense of assessment per se. It'll give you a sense of personality preferences and things like that, and a family of expected behaviors around that type. So with this said, you've already got two schools of assessment. One is the trait-based assessment, and second is the type-based assessment.
Interesting.
The trait-based assessment got consolidated by several other schools across. So you have Minnesota saying they have the Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory, then the 16 PF came along, and several, and the latest one in that league is known as the Neo-PI inventory. So now, all of these are now examined for scientific thoroughness under what is known as the Big Five personality factor theory. And there are several, you can say, variations of the trait-based theory, fewer variations of the type-based theory. And now we can see a proliferation of what early entrants in this game have had. But come the 70s and 80s, 1970s and 80s, I mean, psychology was already being turned on its head, conventional psychology. I'll quote one few specific things that mattered to human assessment since then. We've heard of the marshmallow experiments, right? How children would defer the instant gratification of a marshmallow, and people could defer immediate pleasure. Now,
for a higher reward later.
Later. And this was a situational inducement experiment that Walter Mischel created. This was on the backs of works of people like Henry Murray, etc., who actually discovered there's something known as needs that comes from within. We have certain psychological needs, like need for inclusion, need for belonging, and things like that, and presses, which come from the environment. So the interaction of the two provide, you can say, a syndrome of behaviors. And assessments based on this paradigm started taking root. For example, the personality and preference inventory was introduced by a gentleman called Max Kostick. But this is now, of course, proprietary to a firm in UK. But nonetheless, people started giving up certain limitations of the type theory and the trait theory. And this was one significant departure from early history. If there's a latest, beg your pardon?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is that, assessments started looking at just not assessing a person, but also the influence of environment. And
that's right.
So, certain assessments started coming out for assessing a person, how he behaves in a workspace,
yes,
compared to some other environment.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the latest in that trend, which is actually a genius departure from all of this and comes from a totally different paradigm. And as you know, some existing paradigm is to be broken. It must come from somebody sitting outside of it. There was this mathematician working out of California who went to Australia to explore a different kind of world altogether. And suddenly occurred to him when he was studying Gestalt psychology that mathematical matrices could index behavioral preferences. And he stacked ranked them in orthogonal arrays. And over a period of time, thanks to computing technology and Chinese friends who helped him code all of this, he has been able to put a whole person perspective along with what is known as paradoxical preferences in human beings. To me, as far as I know, and you already mentioned my convenership of the psychometric advocacy group, I find that Dr. Daniel Harrison's instrumentation to be paradigmatically the most advanced and computationally the most sophisticated. So much so that I would say it's the sweet spot between science and the art of measurement. But that's a rundown on the history of assessments.
Interesting. The assessments, there's a lot of things which are going behind it. And in the current generation, what I'm hearing from you is that, yes, there is a lot of behavioral sciences research, number one.
Yes.
Plus statistical expertise. And the third is technological prowess to make certain things which were not possible maybe 10, 20, 30 years back. And so to that extent, what you're telling is, like assessments are, if it is a well-researched based on sound, theories and tested statistically for its validity, reliability, and things like that, are some tools which we can, really use it to our advantage.
Yeah, Satish, if I might indulge a bit, not everybody would be familiar with technical terms, validity and reliability. But let me give a very everyday example to, bring that to the state. I think for audiences in India, they will be familiar with sweets made in Diwali. And let's say your grandmother told you to go and get sugar for making a particular kind of sweet. Now she would tell you particular grain size of the sugar for a particular kind of sweet. And if you were to go to the traditional store in a gunny bag, would be one grade of sugar, and another gunny bag, another grade of sugar. And by visual inspection alone, you could approximate expected taste. Now, that is face validity. Okay? Now, the content validity is had when you actually put it into your tongue and taste it. Okay? Now, the internal consistency of all the grains of sugar in a gunny bag could be had only if sufficient sample size of that gunny bag could be tasted and said that, yes, all of those granules of sugar represent the same taste. So that's known as reliability. Okay. So I thought I'd just make sure that
that this example makes it easier
for people to understand. That's right. And not only that, the utility of that particular granule of sugar goes to make a particular kind of sweetmeat, which is to say that even in assessments, there are aspects that you want to measure, there are constructs that you want to measure, and it will meet particular needs. This is important for us to understand.
So interesting. So, with all these science behind it, it is no wonder that, many of the corporates today have started leveraging on assessments for various needs, right from selection to succession planning to creating, development plans for people. And I'm sure every organization is at a different maturity level, number one, with respect to assessments. Every organization will choose its own different kind of assessment based on their specific need, which they want to take it across. And, while this is going on, one of the things that I get to hear when I'm coaching many leaders, when I ask them the question, so how have they leveraged assessments in their own development? I get to see two kinds of leaders. One kind of leaders, one kind of professionals saying that, look, assessments is all taken care by our company. Our organization decides which tool I should use. And sometimes I respond to those tools with an amount of inhibition, or I may not be very open in expressing myself there because I don't know how it will get, will it be used positively for my development or will it work against me? On the other side of the spectrum, there are many leaders who clearly believe that assessments is for their benefit. Number one, they engage with the organizational assessment approach, and that apart, they invest with themselves and have a practice of using these assessments for their own reflection, for their own understanding, and taking things, shaping their career decisions going forward. So in today's context, as we are seeing that, leaders may not be willing to take risks with respect to careers. It is evolving that, look, if I have to manage my career better, I start using in assessments for my own development and not depend on my organization to take me through some assessment. Right? Am I making this clear, Joseph? Is my view?
I think you're speaking to the anxiety of not knowing the criteria by which I can go through a process of development. And perhaps there's also this indication that what makes for a sense of inhibition when asked to be assessed by our employer. If I've got you in that sense, then perhaps I can speak a few things to that. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think at the outset, let's be very informed of the fact that in India, we don't have civil law that governs the use and practice of psychometric assessments in India. You can't take an employer to court for having assessed you, especially if the outcomes don't favor you. Whereas it's not so in the USA, not so in the UK, because not only are these legally bound, but there's sufficient, you can say, professional governance on the use of these tools. It could be the British Psychological Society, American Psychological Association, and so on and so forth. India has still to mature into that state of practice. But having said so, if the organization is at least willing to abide by the standards set by these nations, the organization stands a better chance. However, given the laxity on law, there are occasions where organizations are willing to compromise on certain things. So for example, using MBTI to assess for selection is one of the worst mishaps one could go through. And
it's
and
a
such
wrong
being,
tool.
it is not, yes, because it's what is considered as an ipsative measure, which is to say that it is only self-reflective in that sense, and it is not a comparator. A comparator assessment is known as the normative one.
I understand.
Okay? So you need norms by which you could be assessed to what is expected of the job situation or whatever else the organization might be considering. So obviously, therefore, it is natural for an assessee in an organization or a potential assessee to have inhibitions. This should not be held against them. And that's the...
It's the current environment which is there on.
That's right. That's right.
And so it makes it makes a case for professionals who want to take more control on their careers, on their career direction forward. Start using assessments as one of the inputs for their own self-discovery, for their own planning ahead and things like that on. And I clearly see there are many leaders wanting to use assessments for their own career management. And so shifting our focus to career management itself, based on my experience of working with many leaders, the common career problems which most leaders face, a couple of them is, look, after some 10-15 years, some people tell, I'm lost in career. I don't know what to do further. Some leaders talk about, look, I'm very clear what to do ahead, but, I just want to validate myself, whether I'm thinking through properly. Am I that kind of a person who can go up that path? Another third perspective, which I often get to hear is, look, I aspire to become a CXO, but I don't know whether I'm ready for it. And what is it that I need to be doing to go across? So while these, and there are many other, career problems which people share with them. I would want to invite your views on a couple of them, and we'll go, as we'll pick up a couple of threads and have a deeper conversation. So Joseph, for things like a mid-career professional to choosing his direction ahead, what role can assessments do?
Well, before I directly respond to this specific question, let us also acknowledge that the influence of the socio-economic policy taken in developing societies has a role to do, a role to play with our conception of careers. For example, in democratic societies, where individual liberty is given some sense of prominence, capitalism thrives. Capitalism thrives also to actually, give capitalists their due, but it has a downward spiral effect on people who seek employment and careers under that system. There is more responsibility on the individual than what society or state may promise. And under conditions of stability, where no major catastrophe like the COVID one exists, this may hold good. But this virus has really thrown up that thing altogether, where you can't go by individual liberty and capitalism per se. So that's a whole different argument. but it's important to know our context. Even so, an individual got to take care of himself, herself. So in that sense, what's the kind of thing that an individual should do? Take a few steps toward, okay, am I going towards an assessment that is reliable, that is valid? Can I read some technical literature regarding this? Is the assessment relating to aspects of what is required for job performance? Does it account for all factors that are conducive to performance? You know, that kind of representation should be there in the man's or the woman's assessment of what kind of assessment the person should take. Now, with regard to the CXO aspect and all, you know, that's, I think, among a select few more privileged careerists. I think the untold stress of the mid-careerists, you know, who just spent about a decade or more, could be even greater. It's perhaps the unspoken silent disease in Indian society today, because they're at the mercy of people who are shaping the structure of economics and all of that, and easily shifting sail in that time is not something that they've been prepared for. Having said that, we should also acknowledge that the dominant IT industry or service industry that is there, you know, most of them acknowledge, I don't know if you've experienced it in your career coaching experiences, but they feel that by around 30, 35, they've come to a stuck point with regard to meaning in life. Because they've taken care of material assets. They got the house, they got the car, they've got perhaps an extra house.
The first 10, 15 years of my career went as I expected. But you know, now I'm lost. What do I do for the next 15, 20 years of my career?
And this is definitely a very valid zone in which people should seek assessment and the benefit of assessments, because there is now the technology, the tools, and a very, very curated practice around aiding, debriefing, and enabling through coaching what these people could do for the future. So this is even more critical, in my opinion, than people who, you know, who have gone a couple of decades ahead and are looking to, you know, upend their careers with the crown of the CEO on their head. Even so, if they're looking at the CEO kind of thing, there are a couple of things that are essential for the CEO role. For example, do they have the desire for decision making and the willingness to accept responsibility for it? Do they take the initiative?
Very interesting point. The willingness to take responsibility and the desire to take a decision. If these are critical things for a CXO kind of a role, or not even a CXO, one level below as a functional head and things like that on, how can assessments help us and to check whether I am there, I'm not there, what do I need to do?
Surely, like for example, when I told you about the Harrison assessments, it gives a very broad, well, I won't say broad, it has a very comprehensive list of job roles for which specific behavioral requirements are templated. So for example, there are about 6,500 templates. And I think, again, it's useful to switch into analogy mode. You see, these templates are designed like formulae. Let's say your audience is familiar with the dish from South India called sambar. Okay? What are essential ingredients for a sambar? You need water.
Yeah.
You need dal.
Yeah.
You need specific spices.
Yeah.
It could be turmeric. It could be, coriander, all of this. You need specific vegetables. These are essential.
Yeah.
There are a few things that are desirable, nice to have.
Yeah.
For example, you could add a mint leaf or a coriander leaf or something like that to give the zing.
Without that also, we can make sambar.
That's right.
There it is desirable.
Yes. If you have it, it adds a zing.
Yeah.
But it's not critical to sambar. But most important that many assessments miss out is what to avoid in making that. For example, if a cook at home is going to say that, let me try Ajinomoto in the sambar. It destroys the essential taste of sambar. So from a range of about 175 tendencies in human behaviors, each template in the Harrison methodology, for example, maps requirements critical, essential, desirable, and things that we need to avoid in a row. And that's how we can assure people who want to get into assessments that they can see what their stack ranking is in this respect. What are the life themes that come up in this respect? And what behaviors support their pursuit of particular behaviors? Because, there are two principal factors in this assessment, for example. Number one, it's built on what is known as the performance enjoyment theory, which is to say, those behaviors that you most enjoy, you're more likely to excel in it.
Could it be that, because we like doing that behavior, we are getting more experience, we are learning unconsciously.
That's right.
Our wavelengths are always tuned to pick up new ideas, new experiments, things on that. And it helps us in that. Interesting,
and the
enjoyment
theory,
performance theory,
The second theory is known as the paradox theory. The paradox theory actually comes from the Gestalt paradigm of polarities. We tend to develop certain polar preferences in behaviors over time. I'll give a brief example for this. For example, someone prefers a direct, frank way of communicating what he or she wants to. Now, the other way of communicating to be very tactful, diplomatic in that sense, and maintaining the relationship with the person with one whom he's communicating to. Now, if one develops a polarity, one could either be very direct at the expense of being tactful, and this person will develop a blind spot, not known to him or her, in being very blunt in communication.
Both are ineffective.
Yes. Whereas, if one is only tactful and diplomatic, one may get evasive just to maintain the relationship. And therefore, the polarity preferences are useful to measure. The ideal, if that were the word to be used, is to develop versatility between the two. One needs a healthy balance between direct communication and diplomatic communication. Forthright diplomacy is another dimension. And most trait-based measurements don't capture this. So you see,
interesting. Just to sum up, what you're telling is, look, using the assessments which are based on this, performance enjoyment theory, could give us insights into, first is if I am choosing to go to a specific path, right, or a specific direction. Say I want to become a functional head, I want to become a business head, or for that matter, I want to become a technical expert. I can, through the use of assessments, figure out, do I have the essential traits or essential behaviors or essential attributes to succeed in that kind of a role? At the same time, do I have some specific weaknesses which can impact my performance in that role.
That's right.
Yeah, that is number one. And the second thing that you're also telling is, look, sometimes it becomes difficult for us to understand whether a specific strength that we have should be developed or should be slightly recalibrated downwards. Yeah, I had a very specific leader whom I was coaching on, and he had a specific challenge with multiplexing. If he's on a webinar, he wants to be on a webinar. He will not check his email. And he was in a very clear doubt, is this good behavior? Is this bad behavior? Because all my peers tell me, be on the webinar, but keep checking your email. Keep responding to your email, and I'm against it. Yeah. Would these assessments help us get more clarity on what actually is our strength?
Surely, in the example that you described,
yeah,
it may not be specifically related to mere communication style, where he could frankly and forthrightly tell the person, hey, I can't be at 2 events at once.
Yeah.
It's also to do with the clarity in asserting one's own personal needs and wants. Or is he confusing his multi-presence with wanting to be helpful?
Yeah.
So, it does disservice to himself at the very beginning and also to others. There's also possibly a tanglement with, he's having an excessive open reflective style of gathering information without developing a certain point of view by actually developing inferences that lead towards a certainty of opinion on a particular kind of matter. And all of these can be measured.
So what I'm hearing again from you is that, what may appear at the outside or at the surface as a boss, is it a multiplexing problem or in a single focus problem? That may not be the real problem at all. It could be something else behind. And this assessment should help us really understand ourselves.
True.
What could be driving our behaviors? Yeah. Another perspective which, many leaders ask me is, when it comes to these assessments, yes, it shows me, some things that I should avoid, or, some things which comes as relatively as, weaknesses. Yeah. The question they ask me is, in our careers, should we go about developing all our weaknesses, or should we focus on only certain weaknesses which are critical to our path? What's your take on
Obviously,
it?
the second one. Obviously, the second one. You see, the advances in neurology, etc., inform us that normal human brain can focus on maybe 3 to 4 significant chunks of information at a time. That's clue number 1. Clue number 2 is that for specific jobs, it's useful to avoid specific derailers. For example, you want to be a CEO, the most important derailer to avoid is to be blindly optimistic. Blind optimism is, we possibly give more focus on the benefits of a strategy than actually evaluating the pitfalls of your strategy. Right? So to override the pitfalls or advice given by your strategy officers, etc., well, that could be number 1. Number 2 is, of course, being defensive itself. That is, I more accept myself for what I think I am than actually placing a humility to improve aspects about myself. So I become defensive. So these are some of the things that are specific to CEO role. Similarly, different roles would have different kind of derailers. So obviously your second one, you can't do too many things at a time. And for each person, the kind of derailer or shortcoming that would be specific to that person's situation it can be assessed, and only through assessment can the person get more clearer insight. Common social feedback mechanisms fall short of the precision and comprehensiveness of assessments. And that is the promise of this sweet spot between science and art.
Interesting. Just to summarizing, the conversations that we had so far, you're very clear that, look, even mid-career professionals can use assessments to help, to give extra information or additional information by which they can decide their future course or the future direction. That is one thing that I'm hearing on. Second thing that I'm hearing on is that, using assessments, they can decide what should they focus for their development. Because there is so much more to develop. There is only a limited bandwidth, limited brain energy that is available. And, assessments help us figuring out what to focus on our development based on our path. And the third interesting thing that you talked about also is derailers. Becoming conscious about which of our traits can derail our careers. Yeah? Did I sum this up effectively, Joseph?
Yes, I think we've captured whatever has transpired in that sense. Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure, we may, assessments can still be further be used to figure out how come that, their performance is not up to their desired level in the current roles. Or, it could be that, look, how come that I'm having, I'm unable to get promoted? What's coming in my way? How come that I'm not effective in various, contexts of, of a work life and things like that on. While, we could go on this conversation. While we have touched this on, one of the next perspectives, once a leader is convinced that yes, assessments are good for me, and I will start using assessments myself rather than waiting for an organization. The next step that they get stuck is, okay, now what? Which assessment is good? There is Strength Finder, there is DISC, there is Harrison assessments, a lot of things across. So first thing is they get confused on how to choose a tool, number one. Second is, when should I use this tool? Is there a time? Is there an event which will trigger for me to use this thing on? Third perspective is, how frequently should I use assessments? Will it make sense if I start using assessments, every 6 months time? And the fourth is, some of these assessments, they come with such detailed analytical reports. Sometimes, some leaders find it difficult to comprehend. So if somebody were to come and ask you, look, what should be the assessment approach I should take? What advice would you give them? And specifically, they want to manage their careers.
Yeah, I think it's useful for normal professionals who are not in specialist roles of human resources or the helping professions to note that there are a variety of tools out there. So there's freedom of market, etc. They will sell as long as it's possible to sell them.
Yeah.
What one must guard against is the cognitive bias of availability. Yeah. If available and marketed, hey, hang on, what else do I need to look into? And that's perhaps the spirit in which you have asked your question.
Yeah.
So number one, does the assessment provide you a reliability score?
Yeah, reliability, number one, yeah.
Because recently I was given a share of reports by somebody who was confused, and I found that the test provider who assessed a whole lot of people in a particular team gave no score of reliability, was based on online technology. Not only that, they found, and they gave the same descriptors, same descriptors for different points on the scale. It is not even normative in that sense. So don't go by the glitz, the glamour, and the money invested in, new age startup firms that provide you the glitz and fancy and the convenience of online. Online is good, provided it also provides you a reliability score. Not only that, it should meet the standards of validity in terms of what the whole thing, for example, just to harbor this point a little further, we use terms in English language: optimism, enthusiasm. So what would you consider as the commonality between these terms?
Both are positive feelings,
Exactly. And in conversational usage, people often tend to interchange them. But if the definitions are tight and measured for what optimism represents and what enthusiasm represents, then there's a further sophistry in what is known as discriminant validity, which is to say optimism different from enthusiasm. Just to explain this further, optimism represents the hope that one has as an attitude to the future. And it could be very different from the eagerness to meet ongoing goals, which is more representative of enthusiasm. And it is possible for the same person to be optimistic and yet not enthusiastic, and another person to be enthusiastic and yet not optimistic. And these play out differently for different, personal scenarios and job scenarios. So it's useful, as I said, to look into reliability scores.
So one thing that I'm hearing from you, Joseph, is, just to not go by the glamour or the marketing pitch, while you understand that, validate it, or rather cross-check it with some experts in that area, just to get a little more sense of its validity, reliability, this difference between discrimination.
These glitzy, glamorous tools more meet the needs of the buyer, not the user.
Very clear.
The buyer is normally an institution. Okay, especially in markets like India, where, as I told you, there is no civil law that protects the right of the user.
Very clear. So this is one, while choosing it.
Yes. No, there's one more point on this. You see, there are other tools that might meet the more rigorous standards of reliability and validity, and yet there's an overhanging on expertise, which is to say that there are certain scales measured there, which are based on clinical psychology dimensions such as neuroticism and anxiety scales and so on and so forth, which means that the person who interprets the results got to be technically trained, not just in the assessment, but must have the background psychological qualifications to take on that. And necessarily, therefore, these kind of assessments have an overhead cost as well. So in spite of that, then, this is this thing. So it is better, therefore, to have those assessments which are, therefore, relatively jargon-free and don't meet with the dead ends of being pigeonholed, as they say, in a particular slot of, psychology-based measurements.
Interesting. So from a career perspective, sure, those instruments may have a use in some other context. But when it comes to for a person to manage careers, use some simple tools which are which can add value and which could be relevant to this purpose.
Yes.
How often would you want? Should a person take these assessments?
Yeah, I think many test providers do provide guidance in this. And for example, the personality and preference inventory, they would say 18 to 24 months. The Harrison assessments would say 2 years minimum gap. Yeah. Okay. So I would say, in addition to that, that unless one has made concerted change in focused developmental areas, don't invest in another assessment.
Okay, because the change takes its own time.
Its own time, provided you invest and actually make the behavioral change consciously.
Yeah. One last perspective, Joseph. While all these assessments are there, as a person who's looking at these assessments, I've now invested, I've now got the report. How do I maximize the results that I've got?
I think here's where coaching makes a significant support ecosystem. And individuals' anxieties are all their own, you see. And that's the thing, especially in the professional world. People hoard their anxieties to themselves. I'm using the word hoard. So much so that they wouldn't know how to unclutter those and focus more on, how to enjoy life. How can they actually liberate themselves from those anxieties? This is where somebody in a coach position who is able to comprehend the nuances of the assessment and the meaning it makes to the respondent or the client of the coach can put together perspectives. And, there are a variety of coaching styles and paradigms in that sense, but where the client assessee is the solution provider rather than the coach. It's the conversations that matter. So I think that's one very, very available and useful maximization tool.
I think go ahead.
No, there's just one more thing. In addition to that, I think there's good relevance of another kind of concept, which is known as your own director's board. For example, you could have a very specific, diverse set of friends who come from a variety of, professional and,
backgrounds,
generational backgrounds. And you could invite them to be on your board of directors, so to say, your personal development board. And you ping them separately at specific frequencies to check in on how you may be doing on your development plan. This is different from the coach relationship. So this aids a more kind of unbiased, very honest, open maximization of one's developmental potential that one is committing to.
Interesting. It's just not that assessment will make an impact on your career, but once you get the assessment reports, what kind of serious effort, conscious effort, and how would you leverage your board of directors or mentors or coaches who can be invested in your development? And the effort and the time that you would want to put in that finally makes that impact on your career. So assessment without a conscious development plan is no use.
That's right. At the same time, coaching that takes several sessions to arrive at the development areas would also be a waste of time, because science and technology allows you to actually arrive at more cogent developmental areas right in the beginning of the process.
So thanks, Dr. Joseph. I think, we are now close to an hour. And, I think this whole conversation, just to summarize for our listeners, very, very clearly, assessments, while it is now close to more than 100, 20 years. Initially, it started to measure these scholastic aptitudes, but over time, with respect to the theories, with respect to statistics getting into it, with respect to technology, has become much more evolved. And it is in our interest to use it positively and just not wait for the organization to take us through some assessment tool. That is number one.
Yes.
Second is, it can solve multiple problems in careers by giving you a lot of information, a lot of insights. Third, be clear. Don't go and buy an assessment based on the marketing pitch only. Do your own research, do your own, talking to experts and figuring out in your context, is this the right tool? And finally, based on those assessments, have a conscious, clear, focused development plan to achieve your, career management objectives. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I have
any
just
parting thoughts, Joseph? Yeah.
yes, just a few. Thank you for inviting me on that one. Number one, you see, the more derailers that a simple assessment can catch, the better. For example, the most touted ones on derailers captures only 11, whereas the Harrison's captures more than 34, 35.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number two, that assessment that serves both normative comparison as also the developmental benchmarking in one process, far more economical. You don't want a person to do a normative assessment and a ipsative assessment, two separate assessments altogether for the same person. So that's inefficient. Yeah. And thirdly, just to kind of sum up, this is a very difficult time for people.
Yeah.
And Dr. Daniel Harrison, with whom I am partnering as an extension of the service here, has offered free career navigation for people. They can get on to harrisoncareerguide.com.
harrisoncareerguide.com. Yes, I will put the link in the post as well.
Yes, and that's valid for a year, and they can keep navigating their suitabilities, their behavioral suitabilities to particular kind of career, the more than 600, 700 careers on which they can check out how their behavioral natural preferences get there. And that data is protected under European GDPR, California law, so no worry on that either.
Thanks for this, information as well. I'm sure, that could be one starting point for the listeners to take on. And so thanks everyone for watching this episode. Just spending about 45 minutes to listen to our conversation truly reflects your own investment or your own importance for your own career development. And I'm sure you would have got all the insights. And if you need us to get in touch with us, do feel free to get in touch with Dr. Joseph George or myself. I will put the email IDs when I post it along with this post on. You can reach us and see, how you can leverage on our knowledge to helping you in your next career steps ahead. Thank you once again for taking this time on a Friday evening. Thanks, Joseph, for taking your time off. And we'll sign off for now. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you and bye-bye.